Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take pretty complex topics and break them down into essential, actionable insights just for you. In today's world, everything's data-driven, right? Organizations are, well, they're increasingly moving critical workloads to the cloud. They're looking for flexibility, scalability, efficiency, and this shift, it brings up a really pivotal decision. Which cloud provider is actually the right fit? So today, our deep dive is tackling this insightful newsletter that compares Amazon Web Services, AWS, and Microsoft Azure, two absolute giants in cloud computing. And we're specifically focusing on their database offerings. Our mission, to kind of demystify the core differences, the similarities too, in their database tech, helping you make a more informed choice for your enterprise data.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here is that this decision, it goes way beyond just the tech specs, doesn't it? It's really about understanding the the broader strategic implications for your business, everything from cost to control, even down to like vendor support. We'll be looking at relational databases like SQL database, MySQL, PostgreSQL, MariaDB, but also getting into the nuances of NoSQL and data warehousing solutions. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. Let's start with the big picture then, cloud data warehousing. The source material highlights how cloud computing has just fundamentally revolutionized data management, especially with database as a service or DBase. So what are the really compelling reasons companies are making this shift? Why move their data to the cloud?
Well, the allure is definitely strong. A key benefit, maybe the biggest one, is freedom from on-site hardware. That dramatically cuts down operational overhead. And then there's scalability and elasticity. I mean, these databases can literally grow or shrink on demand. So you get rapid expansion or contraction, as business needs change.
And the cost effectiveness piece, that's got to be huge, right? Especially for, say, small and mid-sized businesses.
Yeah.
It just removes those really high upfront costs. Hardware, software, it's gone. Plus, you've got the assumed efficiency from things like parallel computing, way less installation and maintenance time. The cloud provider handles all that.
Exactly. But it's important to look at the other side, too. The challenges. Moving huge amounts of data to the cloud. It's not always straightforward. There are complexities. You've got significant security concerns to think about, potential performance challenges, and crucially, this issue of losing some direct control. Your data isn't on your premises anymore. We see this with large enterprises. Companies over maybe 1,000 employees, they're actively working on warehousing data that's currently stuck in silos. So these challenges, very real for them.
Okay, that gives us a good sense of the why. But what about the actual database offerings, the tech itself? Both AWS and Azure, they have extensive options. Relational, NoSQL, they cover a lot. Let's maybe dig into the NoSQL side a bit more, specifically comparing AWS DynamoDB and Azure Cosmos DB.
Yeah, this is interesting because their foundation is quite similar in some ways. Both are highly available, scalable, globally distributed. They're fully managed serverless NoSQL databases, mostly acting as document or key value stores. But where they really shine, their specific strengths, that's where they start to diverge.
Right. DynamoDB, the source highlights it as extremely fast. We're talking response times often under 10 milliseconds. And if you're already deep in the AWS ecosystem, it just feels like a natural choice. It integrates so smoothly with things like AWS IAM, that's their identity and access management for really fine-grained control. Plus, virtually unlimited storage and being fully managed, that really does take away a lot of the operational headache.
Yeah, it does. On the other hand, you've got Cosmos DB, which offers, I'd say, a really high degree of flexibility. It supports a whole variety of data models. You can use SQL-like queries, which is nice, but also Gremlin, Azure Tables, even MongoDB APIs. And it has these 5 different consistency models. That lets you really fine-tune the trade-off between, how quickly updates appear everywhere versus latency. It makes it incredibly versatile, and it scales really, really well.
Okay, so trade-offs. When you're actually choosing between them, what are the big considerations? The source mentioned that for DynamoDB, predicting costs can sometimes be a bit tricky. Doesn't matter which billing model you use. And maybe the query options feel a bit limited if you're very used to traditional SQL.
True. And for Cosmos DB, that huge flexibility, it can actually make it a little harder to master initially. You really need a deep understanding to get the optimal performance and cost efficiency out of it.
So big picture implications.
Yeah, if we connect that back, it kind of suggests Cosmos DB is often the better bet if you need that wider data model flexibility, or maybe you're just already heavily invested in Azure. DynamoDB, though, it really excels in those high-performance, low-cost scenarios, especially if you're already snug within the AWS ecosystem where those integrations really pay off.
Okay, moving beyond those general databases, What about handling truly massive amounts of data? Like for large-scale warehousing and analytics, what are the big guns they offer there?
Right, for the heavy analytical workloads, both have powerful solutions. AWS offers Redshift, and Azure has Synapse Analytics. You might remember that as Azure SQL Data Warehouse before they rebranded it.
The source also pointed out, though, that for really huge data sets, like over 1 billion rows and where you need super high performance,
Yeah,
well, there are other strong players too. Things like Snowflake and Google BigQuery, especially if you pair BigQuery with Looker for visualization. So yeah, it's definitely not just an AWS versus Azure fight in the data warehousing space.
good point. It's a broader field there.
Let's pivot a bit. What happens once you've picked a cloud, or maybe you're even thinking about switching? Migration. The source notes that moving existing databases or changing cloud providers altogether, that's a significant undertaking. Often fraught with complexities was the phrase used.
Yeah, and this raises a really important question. Just how hard is it to move your data? Migrating from Oracle specifically, that can be particularly challenging. Some companies literally feel they have no immediate way to move off it. Now, AWS does offer programs to help, like the Database Migration Accelerator, DMA, and the Database Migration Service, DMS. But these services aren't free. They come with costs. There's also the Schema Conversion Tool, SCT. That's a free desktop app. It can, assess if a migration is feasible, and even try converting Oracle PL SQL, that's Oracle's procedural language, to PLPD SQL for PostgreSQL. But even then, redevelopment costs can be, well, substantial. And if you're looking at Oracle databases in Azure, the source basically says it's the same shit fight, but different. So, yeah, still complex.
Wow. Okay. And what about just a full switch, say moving everything from AWS to Azure or vice versa?
That requires, according to the source, considerable upskilling, learning, and time. A huge effort. And it might not even be worth it unless there are really significant financial incentives pushing you, like drastically cheaper prices or maybe some big free credits to make the jump.
That's a major undertaking then.
Absolutely. And this kind of brings us to another critical factor for a lot of organizations: customer support. Now, obviously, experiences can vary person to person, company to company, but the source did highlight some notable differences people report. For Azure, some users have apparently had frustrating experiences. They mentioned delays in getting support tickets resolved, kind of vague responses, often only getting a proper response when the service level agreement, the SLA, is about to expire.
Yeah, and there was a really interesting specific example given. A silent expiration of a service principal in Azure, that's basically like an automated account applications use, well, it expired without warning. And it led to multiple days of failed builds, blocked deployments, total standstill. And because they felt the support wasn't timely or effective enough, that particular organization actually decided to migrate away from Azure to AWS just to get stability and, developer velocity back.
That's a pretty stark example. On the flip side, with AWS, while some users do note that maybe the quality of support has declined a bit over time, AWS is still frequently regarded as more responsive and reliable compared to Azure, according to the source. Many people seem to find the AWS support experience more structured. Faster turnaround times, clearer communication from actual human agents. That makes it often the preferred choice when you're running really critical workloads.
Makes sense. And one final cost note that popped out. While both offer managed database services, running Microsoft SQL Server, specifically in AWS RDS, well, it's convenient, sure, but often pretty expensive.
Yeah, that specific combination can get pricey.
So, okay, we've covered a lot. What does this all boil down to for your decision when you're trying to choose? The source is really clear. There's no single best cloud database. It's highly dependent on your organization's specific context, your existing tech stack, your strategic priorities.
Exactly. If you look at the bigger picture, it's really about aligning with what you already have in place and where you're trying to go strategically. So, for instance, if your company is primarily an MS SQL shop, or you rely heavily on Windows Microsoft Office tools, well, then Azure is often seen as the right and slightly better fit. The tooling and integration just tend to line up better there.
Right. But if you have more diverse needs, maybe you want more customization options, then AWS's database offerings are often perceived as more varied, more customizable, and better value, especially if you're not primarily an MS SQL user. And AWS is also often suggested if your teams are mainly working in Linux or Mac OS environments.
Good point. And one more thing for companies that need to connect back to their on-premises data centers. Azure is generally considered to have a really robust hybrid system. That can be a huge advantage depending on your setup, which, raises that key question. How tightly integrated does your cloud solution need to be with your existing on-site stuff?
So ultimately, the message seems to be don't rush this decision. It really needs to come from a well-defined strategy. You've got to consider your specific business needs, your current tech landscape, your long-term goals.
Absolutely. And given the complexity and the potential cost if you get it wrong, and the source mentions tens of thousands of dollars during migration or more, mistakes are expensive. So the strong recommendation is to consider engaging an expert, someone specialized in cloud migration and database architecture before you make any big moves.
What an illuminating deep dive that was. We've really covered a lot of ground, from the compelling reasons to even consider cloud data warehousing to the real nuances between NoSQL options like DynamoDB and Cosmos DB. We looked at the heavy hitters for analytics, Redshift, Synapse analytics, and also those critical, often overlooked bits like migration challenges and customer support realities.
Yeah, and the core takeaway seems pretty clear, doesn't it? While both AWS and Azure offer really robust, capable database solutions, there just isn't a single best answer that fits everyone. Your choice really has to come down to a well-thought-out strategy, one that's tailored specifically to your existing ecosystem, your unique needs, and your long-term vision.
So, thinking about all this, what does it really mean for you? Consider this potential costs of missteps the source mentioned, tens of thousands of dollars, maybe even more. How could doing a really thorough strategic deep dive before you jump into a major cloud migration actually transform your company's success? Not just saving money, but maybe something more. And maybe think about how you can apply this kind of holistic, preemptive thinking to other major tech decisions you might be facing in your own work. Something to chew on. Well, thank you for joining us for another deep dive. We really hope this exploration has given you some valuable insights and helped you become even more well-informed.